Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. So like I said in the teacher message video, this video is going to be a way to give you answers to that workbook assignment, to that abolition workbook assignment. So I want to make sure I kind of go through the questions and go over the questions. But the first part I want to start with, and the first thing I want to look at, is just to kind of define what the abolition movement was. Excuse me, sorry about that. So the abolition movement was a movement to end slavery. Simple, to the point. That was the idea behind it. That's what it was trying to do. Now, the abolitionist movement came out of a movement known as the Second Great Awakening. So I'm going to kind of explain how the abolitionist movement came from that, and then I will focus on question number one and just talk about that answer. Okay? So the Second Great Awakening is a revival of religion. Religion becomes more popular. More people begin to practice religion and kind of follow religion at this time. And it is going to kind of lead people to re-educate themselves on the teachings of different types of religion. So as people begin to do those readings, as people begin to learn those teachings, they realize, and many of them come to understand, that some of the teachings of Christianity try to get people and show people that they should treat their fellow man with kindness, with respect. They should see them as equals. They should not see anyone else as lower than themselves, as worse than themselves. Everybody should be seen as the same. You are all part of humanity and stuff like that. So when they look at this institution of slavery and they look at this system of slavery, they realize that that is the complete opposite of what Christianity and what other religions are trying to teach people. They realize that this goes completely against what Christianity is teaching them. Now, many in the South used Christianity as a way to justify slavery, but many in the North and even some in the South understand Christianity differently, and a lot of that comes from the Second Great Awakening. So how did the Second Great Awakening contribute to the abolition movement? It really created the abolition movement and made people want to create the abolition movement because they saw slavery as a moral wrong. And it actually is right here in this last sentence. Many religious people saw slavery as a moral wrong. So as long as you had that written on the line, that sentence written on the line, that would have been the correct answer I was going for that question. But at least we kind of understand in a little more detail how that happened and why that happened. So because of those religious teachings, people began to see slavery as a moral wrong, so they created the abolition movement to fight slavery and to really fight that system and kind of end that system in the South. Okay? So now, even though you have a stated goal of ending slavery, people are going to have a different opinion, and many anti-slavery reformers are going to have a different opinion of what happens after slavery ends. And this is what the idea, over what ideas did anti-slavery reformers disagree? This is going to be the idea that anti-slavery reformers disagree over. And that idea is whether African Americans, whether freed African Americans should be seen as equal to whites or should not be seen as equal to whites. So there are going to be two sides of this. Some people are going to look at African Americans and remember the Declaration of Independence and hear that all men are created equal and believe that no matter what race, what ethnicity, what religion you are, everybody is equal. All men is created equal. But there are some that are going to look at African Americans and see them as inferior to whites. So that is going to be the main disagreement. However, abolition is going to hang on until the end of the Civil War because the stated goal is to end slavery. That's the idea. That's the point. What happens after that is going to be for other societies to figure out. But that is what idea anti-slavery reformers disagreed over. It was the idea whether African Americans should be seen as equal to whites or not equal to whites. Okay, so that takes care of that. So, abolition forms a major society, and there is a major society known as the American Anti-Slavery Society that fights for the cause of abolition. William Lloyd Garrison is one of the men that founds the American Anti-Slavery Society. However, there needs to be two societies, and the reason there needs to be two societies is because the American Anti-Slavery Society did not allow women to join the American Anti-Slavery Society, which, looking back on that now, is kind of a joke because there are women that believe in abolition. There are women that want to fight and want to advocate or want to push for abolition and the end of slavery. So the fact that women were not allowed in the American Anti-Slavery Society today seems kind of like a joke. But back then, women were not seen as intelligent as men. Again, as dumb as that sounds today, women were not seen as equal to men, and women kind of were thought of as their job was to stay at home, take care of the kids, cook, clean, and everything else. So a woman by the name of Lucretia Mott decides that she's had enough, and she's going to found what is known as the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society in 1833 to allow women to join the cause of abolition and to fight for an end to slavery. So why were there two anti-slavery societies? Because the American Anti-Slavery Society did not allow women. Now, there are a lot of famous abolitionists. Lucretia Mott is one. William Lloyd Garrison is another. Angelina and Sarah Grimke are two others. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. There are a lot of famous abolitionists that are going to write about the horrors of slavery, and the terrible conditions of slavery. In the case of Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, these are two people that actually went through that system and actually were slaves before they were able to free themselves. And they were two people that actually were kind of the faces of why slavery was an evil system. Frederick Douglass being somebody that would kind of conference and discuss the issue of slavery with Abraham Lincoln, as well as other famous Northerners and as well as other powerful government officials and powerful Northerners to try to get that system ended. And Sojourner Truth would also do much of the same, as well as try to help found the women's rights movement that is going to kind of start around the same time as well to get women to the right to vote and stuff like that. But going on that little tangent real quick, these are people that have been through the system of slavery, that understand it, and that are interacting with powerful people in government to try to get the system of slavery ended. So you have the abolitionist movement that is trying to end slavery and trying to end the system of slavery. You also have a system known and a route known as the Underground Railroad that is trying to hurt slavery and trying to save as many slaves as it can. And the Underground Railroad was a system, it was a network of white and black abolitionists who helped slaves escape to free territory. That was the point of it. That was the idea. That was what the Underground Railroad was trying to do, was trying to help African Americans escape slavery and travel to free territory, which was the North. And one of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad was an escaped slave named Harriet Tubman. Hey, you guys have heard of Harriet Tubman before. You should have heard of Harriet Tubman before, but she was a very famous conductor of the Underground Railroad and was able to make 20 trips to the North and freed more than 300 slaves. Harriet Tubman was actually a former slave and was able to escape slavery herself before realizing that she couldn't take and allow other slaves to stay in slavery and be stuck in the South. So she decided to go back and bring as many people as she could into free territory, into the North, to save as many people as she could. And she was able to save more than 300 slaves. Now, The system of abolition is going to have those that are going to oppose it. So we know in the South that you have many Southerners who own slaves, who use them to help work on their farms or use slaves to solely work on their farms. If you're a plantation owner, you don't need to work yourself. You can just have the slaves work for you. So obviously, that is their way of life. That is the way of life that the South has. So the South is not going to want to give that up. So that is one reason that some people are going to oppose abolition. They felt that slavery was vital to their economy. Many white Southerners felt that way. Many white Southerners also felt that outsiders should not tell them what to do. So those are two acceptable answers. If you had one of those, that was perfect. You're right on the money. Another answer that was acceptable would have been the next sentence that says Northerners feared that freed slaves would take jobs away from white people. Now, it is a misconception or a thought that most people have that isn't actually true, that all Northerners supported abolition. That's not actually the case. Some Northerners did not actually, and many workers did not actually support abolition because they feared that freed slaves would take their jobs away, because they feared they would work for lower wages and their bosses and the factory owners and stuff like that would hire the new, cheaper labor and fire the white workers that had been there for a while and needed a living wage and everything else. That was what they were afraid of. Now, would that have necessarily happened? Most likely not. But that is one fear that they had. So those were three acceptable answers for why some people opposed abolition. And overall, that was the idea, and that was the point behind the abolitionist movement. It was to end slavery, and these were a lot of the parts that went along with it. You had the American Anti-Slavery Society. You had the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, and you had the Underground Railroad. You had very famous people like Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman that were part of abolition. And you had those that agreed with it and disagreed with it as a movement. Those that saw it going in one direction, where African Americans would be completely and totally equal to whites, and others that went in another direction, saw it going in another direction where African Americans would not be equal to whites, but they wouldn't be forced into the system of slavery. So that sums up abolition. That's what I was going for. That's what I was trying to get you guys to figure out and understand, was just kind of what abolition was and some of the differences. So with that said, guys, have yourselves a fantastic day, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Kansas-Nebraska crisis. Have a great day, guys.